Hey there, welcome to Survivor's Story. My name is Daniel. I'm sorry it's been a while since I've done a video. There's been a lot going on in my life, and in part, I've been waiting for other survivors to reach out to me that we could do interviews and share their stories with the world, but that isn't really happening. So I'm going to focus on a series of videos talking about the phenomena surrounding SRA and CSA. So today, what I want to talk about, which is a very natural, automated, unconscious response that survivors experience, or anyone that suffers trauma experiences, which are the responses of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Now, these are really important distinctions. In a previous video that I've done, I forgot to mention the fawn response, so I really want to go into that. And this really is prompted by, as you're aware, there's been the Epstein files that have been released recently, and I found it actually very confirming for my own story, seeing the horrific details and uh, testimonies of SRA, of torture and horrific abuse that's been talked about in these documents. And I've been talking quite avidly, quite enthusiastically online on Facebook and on X, sort of talking with people about these disclosures and about my own story. And a recent one was a woman talking about Virginia Guthrie, who was a victim of Epstein, who in some of her pictures was smiling next to him. So apparently she was, a slave of his, of her own free will. And I tried explaining to this lady that I was debating that, look, it's very common for an abuse survivor to be smiling next to their abuser. Uh, that could be called the fawn response, or that could be a result of her fearing for her own life, for example. So that's what kind of gave me a kick up the backside to get this video done. Really happy to be here with you guys. It's probably going to be a medium length video. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into it. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn. They're intelligent survival strategies your nervous system learned when it had to. At a high level, fight, flight, freeze, fawn are automatic responses driven by the autonomic nervous system when it detects threat, often in overwhelming circumstances. They happen before logic, language, or choice have a chance to come into the equation. You don't consciously decide them, your body does. And we're going to go through a grounded, trauma informed breakdown of each one, how it feels inside and how it shows up outside, and what it is trying to protect. And I'm going to share with each of them just a bit of my own personal experience just to help illustrate each of these points as well. So, first, we're going to talk about flight. We're going to talk about fight. So, the fight response. Uh, in some ways, the most empowering response to have, but one that can, as you get older, as the trauma stays with you, as it can occur as an almost automatic, habitual response to stimuli, it can be one that also becomes very unhelpful, as all of them can if the trauma is not processed and moved through. So fight, I will overpower the threat. So the core drive is to regain control through force, anger, or dominance, and this response mobilizes energy towards the threat. The nervous system state, the sympathetic nervous system is in high activation, and the adrenaline, cortisol, and increased blood flow to muscles is activated. Now, the internal experience is intense rage, anger, irritation, a feeling of being cornered or being disrespected. It can have a strong sense of, I must not be weak. And there's a hyper focus on injustice or threat. Now, the external behaviors can look like arguing, shouting, or a confrontational tone, controlling behavior, defensiveness, sarcasm, verbal aggression, or sometimes even physical aggression. In relationships, when you're caught up in your fight response, conflicts can escalate quickly. You may find difficulty in actually backing down. It may feel safer to be feared than to be vulnerable, and apologies can feel like losing. So, what does the fight response protect? At some point, fighting back was the only way to survive emotionally, physically, or psychologically. This response often develops when boundaries were violated, powerlessness was intolerable, anger was the only available self protection. Fight is not anger issues, it's stored survival energy with nowhere safe to go. Now, to illustrate this from my own story, when I first had the memories of CSA and SRA come back to me through the use of underground MDMA therapy and through the use of somatic experiencing, I was reliving these memories every day, processing and digesting the trauma. And after several weeks, there was a particular week where I locked myself in the house. I kind of, in the room that I was processing the trauma, I kind of put pillows up against the window and boarded the window so that sound wouldn't be emitted because I knew what was coming was going to be really, really intense. It's in the house on my own. I wasn't a risk to anyone, but I just knew there was really intense trauma processing coming. And during this particular week, I had 2 days where I processed fight energy. Now, this was fight energy that I was not able to express at the time because the adults, when I was just a small boy, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, I tried fighting in some ways, but ultimately that was arrayed against me was so overpowering, the power imbalance was just so incredible that really I had to resort to the other responses of freeze or fawning or flight wasn't even really an option. So what I did is I processed over these 2 days all the trapped fight energy that never really got to be expressed. And over about 2 days, through having a somatic process of following the unfolding of my body, reliving myself get into particular shapes, particular positions that I was raped, that I was abused, that I was tortured in. And what was funny is in these somatic processes, my breathing would change. And I'd never experienced this before, but my breathing became almost robotic. It became, and I would kind of move almost robotically as if I was seeking a way out of the invisible hold that I was held in. So I found a way through this panting and through this robotic movement to break free of my, at this stage, imaginary abusers or impressions of abusers. And over these 2 days, I spent hours, probably about 6, 7, 8 hours a day breaking free and then activating fight energy. And then I would fight invisible assailants. I'd be grabbing pillows and tearing them. I'd be smashing the spare bed in the spare room. At one point, I even smashed the door so that I could escape, but that gets a bit more into flight. But I basically physically enacted safely fighting, killing, maiming, those that were causing such horrific harm to me. So it was a really safe, really conscious way of processing this fight energy. And after a couple of days, it kind of petered out and I didn't really have any more of that energy left to process. So it was very cathartic, quite shocking. I was absolutely exhausted at the end of those 2 days from just the physical exertion of role playing, fighting off these abusers and enacting vengeance on them. So that's a bit about my personal journey with the fight response. Now, the second response we're going to talk about is the flight response. So the core message of the flight response is, I must get away. The core drive is to escape the threat as fast as possible. And this response mobilizes energy away from danger, whereas the fight response is energy towards the danger. The nervous system state is sympathetic nervous system is a high activation again, and restlessness and urgency. The internal experience is one of anxiety, panic, dread. You have racing thoughts, you feel trapped or overwhelmed, and you have the urge to do something, anything. The external behaviors can often look like avoidance from people, conversations, or emotions, overworking, over-exercising, constant busyness, or physical leaving and emotional distancing. In relationships, it can express as pulling away when things get intense, difficulty staying present during conflict, fear of being caught or being engulfed, and you may want to disappear rather than confront an actual issue. Now, what is it protecting this flight response? When staying meant danger, escape equaled safety. It often develops when conflict led to punishment, emotions were unsafe, and there was no reliable protector. Flight isn't commitment issues, it's a nervous system that learned that staying hurts. So for me, my fight and my flight response got quite shut down and trapped the energy inside because what I was against was so overwhelming and so controlling and so overbearing that I had no way of fighting and I had no way of fleeing. I had nowhere to flee to. And if I tried to fight, I would have been punished and made to suffer even more intensely. Although I did try to fight sometimes and I did try to run away sometimes. Now, in the aforementioned 7 days where I locked myself in the house to process just these intense energies all day, every day, at the end of the 2 days, when I was processing the fight energy, I could just feel that I needed to express the flight energy. So in this gestalt that I processed fighting off and getting the attackers off me. And then I knew I needed to process the escape energy. So I basically punched and headbutted my way through the door of the spare bedroom that I was using to process the energy. And as I got out the door, I even picked up a pillow and I imagined that that was the girl that was murdered alongside me. I went downstairs. I laid her on the sofa. I said, I'm sorry I wasn't able to protect you. I protected you this time. Like, it's okay. You're going to be okay. And, it was really profound, had me in tears, had me all over the place, really. And then I processed it again. And this time I just expressed pure flight. And as I punched and headbutted my way out the door, slung the door open, I sprinted down the stairs in the house. I flung open the kitchen door. I went sprinting out through the garden. I scaled the fence of the garden really quickly. And then I ran in the field as fast as I could to the opposite end of the field that was at the back of the house. And in this processing, I felt a huge jubilation and a sense of freedom. And I finally felt as if, wow, I just escaped. I escaped. And it was such a good feeling. It was such a good feeling. So that's a little bit of my personal story with flight. So next, I want to talk about, how's this going? This going okay. I want to talk about freeze. So the freeze response. The core message of freeze is, if I don't move, maybe I won't be seen. The core drive is to shut down to survive. This is a mobilization. It's not calm. Under the surface, the system is going, it's like the swan paddling on the lake. The feet are going, the nervous system is going, the foot of the pedal of the accelerator is pressed fully down. So the nervous system is in many ways highly activated, but on the surface, it can look like you're a corpse. So the nervous system state is the dorsal vagal system shuts down, low energy, collapse in response. The internal experience is numbness, disassociation, sometimes foggy thinking, sometimes feeling unreal or disconnected, overwhelm, and even paralysis. I would also say this is the state where disassociation is most common. I've had many experiences of leaving my body, looking down on my body, seeing what was being done to me by others, and yeah, basically psychically escaping it and just leaving my body to deal with the horrific things that were being done to me. Now, the external behaviors can look like an inability to act or decide, procrastination that feels involuntary, zoning out, staring off into space, and difficulty speaking or responding. In relationships, um, it can look like going quiet during a confrontation, saying I don't know in response, appearing withdrawn or checked out, feeling invisible, but also feeling safer that way. Now, what is protected? So when fight and flight fail, freeze reduces pain. It's common in chronic abuse, childhood trauma, and situations with no escape. Freeze isn't laziness or depression, it's a nervous system conserving life. So it is an amazing response, and it can bring up a lot of shame because you're not fighting back and you're just lying there, you're just taking it. I've had a lot of shame that I've had to work through around this response, and I froze a lot and I disassociated a lot, but it protected me to an incredible extent, and it protected you to an incredible extent too. So we've really got to make peace with these responses and see the wisdom in them and really come to appreciate them for what they are if they are going to loosen their grip and start to allow more life force to return, more freedom of expression to return, more agency, more you to return. And what would I say from my personal experience? I mean, in the memories that I relived, I froze a lot. I disassociated a lot. I also went into the fawn response a lot. But fundamentally, because fight or flight was just not an option, freeze and fawn were my default responses. And like I said, it's brought up a lot of shame in the processing of the trauma, but I now have quite a deep appreciation of the freeze response because it does have a numbing effect. You are less connected to your body. You feel the pain far less. Things get compartmentalized, and you even psychically or spiritually leave your body and just let the autonomous aspects of of your physicality just take over, while your spirit is effectively free to dwell elsewhere. So that's the freeze response. The fawn response, so the last one we're going to talk about. How long has this been? It's not showing me. It's not showing me. Um, but yeah, the fawn response. So the core message is if I please you, I'll be safe. Now, you can see how, in circumstances of abuse of CSA or SRA, just how easy a response for a vulnerable, completely vulnerable child that is for them to slip into. So the core drive is to appease the threat to avoid harm. And this response uses connection as a means of survival. And as I say that, I'm like, oh my God, I've used that all my life through abusive relationships and as a child through incredibly abusive relationships as a means of survival. So the nervous system state is mixed. It's sympathetic and social engagement, and it's high alert and outward focused. The internal experience is a fear of rejection or a fear of angering others, and it has a hyper awareness of others' moods and of others' needs. There is a loss of access to your own needs, and there is a deep, deep shame around actually having boundaries in the first place. The external behaviors can exhibit as people pleasing, over agreeing, over giving, a difficulty saying no, and minimizing your own pain, your own suffering. In relationships, this can look like attracts controlling or needy partners. You feel responsible for others' emotions, for others' behaviors, for others' states of being. Resentment builds silently, and your identity can feel unclear. Now, what the fawn response protected was when safety depended on others' approval, self abandonment literally kept you alive. It often forms when love was conditional, caregivers were volatile, and conflict meant abandonment. Fawn isn't a weakness, it's a relational intelligence used for survival. Now, if you think of what everything we've just spoken about, take that into a context of CSA or SRA, and that just takes it to a whole other level. And, I've relived stuff where I would go to my core abuser, my father, or other abusers, and I would even try to initiate connection with them, partly to protect my siblings or to protect my mother, or partly because I could sense they were in a bad mood and I tried to head off their aggressiveness by being compliant. And, talking of shame, I've had a huge amount of shame around this, like for myself as a man, I should have fought, I should have been willing to die before I gave in or before I complied with such wickedness. But the reality is that for a child, this is just so overbearing, so overwhelming that to form it for a small boy, for a small girl, it's often the most intelligent from a survival physiological perspective for one to take. And it's one that I've used a lot. And, what does it say here? It's played out for me in adult life, not just in childhood, where I have put other people's needs before my own, where I have thought everything was my fault, everything was my responsibility, a real issue having my own boundaries and attracting really abusive people into my life to play out this kind of dynamic. And it can get better. It can get better. Dear viewer, dear fellow survivor, it can get better. You do the work to heal. You do the work to process the somatic, traumatic energy of the abuse you once suffered. Do the psychological work to gain perspective and to gain awareness of your own proclivities, your own automated responses. And then you start to get more choice. Then you start to be able to assert boundaries. Then you start to be able to prioritize your own value. Then you start to be able to show up as a sovereign being in relationship. So, yeah, one last crucial truth. Most people don't have just one response, they have patterns. For example, fight and fawn, or freeze and flight, or fawn until overwhelmed and then fight. And these patterns, whatever your patterns are, whatever mine are, they make perfect sense then in the period of abuse. They were the perfect physiological uh, responses in the face of the abuse that you suffered as a child. It's really difficult to accept that. It's really difficult to see the ways that we make ourselves small, that we seem to accept abuse. But in the adult understanding of the full context of the situation, we really need to give ourselves a break. Healing isn't about erasing these responses, it's about recognizing them It's about thanking them, and it's about teaching your nervous system that it's much safer now than before, and that you don't need necessarily these same responses. So there's a huge call to action here for self-compassion, for self-love, for gentleness towards yourself in the face of these responses. And as you do the work with a good therapist, with online study, with watching videos like this, with awareness-based meditations, you can, with learning about boundaries and how to assert boundaries. There's a great book, actually, The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren. That's a great book to read that talks about emotional integrity and boundaries. It's a fantastic read. So, look, there is hope, and this isn't just for survivors of abuse, whatever the type of abuse is. It doesn't have to be CSA or SRA. Please pass this on if you think this will be helpful to someone else. But just as importantly, this video is aimed at somebody that may know a survivor of abuse, or just some random Joe blogs from the general public, because when we understand these behaviors and we understand these automatic responses, it's much easier to understand the survivor that smiles next to the abuser, just like Virginia Guthrie did next to Jeffrey Epstein, who feared for her safety, who'd been abused since she was a young girl, who'd been procured as a slave to this awful, terrible, wicked man. I wouldn't even call him a man. I don't know what he is, but awful creature. So thank you for watching. This is Survivor's Story. Every survivor is a hero by definition, by understanding of the evil that they have survived and that they have not become like their abusers. That is a heroic endeavor, and my heart and my love goes out to all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, to listen to me. I really appreciate it. And I will try and do another video soon. All right. So you take care. Thank you for watching, and be safe. Be well.